Okay, so today we're going deep on Girolamo Cardano. This guy, born back in 1501, wasn't just some philosopher sitting in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. He was a physician, a mathematician, an astrologer. Talk about a Renaissance man.
And get this, his ideas about, the nature of reality and knowledge, how to live a good life, they still come up in philosophy today.
What's really interesting from a philosopher's point of view is how Cardano didn't see those different areas as separate. His work as a physician, the math stuff, even the astrology, it all fed into his big philosophical picture.
Right, that's so important. And to really get him, you got to look at his life. I mean, talk about drama. Illegitimate birth, always fighting for respect as a scholar. His son, tragically executed. He even had a run-in with the Roman Inquisition.
Definitely. You can't separate his philosophy from that turbulent life. All that experience is woven into his thinking about order, knowledge, the soul, what it means to be wise.
So for this deep dive, we're doing it philosopher to philosopher, right? We'll start with his life story, with the huge amount of stuff he wrote. Then we'll get into his cosmology, how he understood the universe. And then, of course, his ideas about the soul, its place in that cosmos.
And we can't forget his moral philosophy, his advice on living well. Plus, we'll touch on the whole divination thing, his fascination with astrology and dreams, and that whole drama with the Inquisition. It shows you what intellectual life was like back then.
Definitely a lot to unpack there. So let's lay the groundwork. Cardano, born 1501 in Pavia, and right from the start, his illegitimate birth made things complicated.
Yeah, even though it got sorted out later, you got to think that left a mark on him. It's interesting, though, his father was a lawyer, but he was also into math, natural philosophy, the big question.
And he wanted Cardano to go into law, too, right? But Cardano, he had other ideas.
His passion was medicine. And in the end, he ended up wrestling with those same big philosophical questions his father was into.
He went his own way, studied at Pavia, then Padua. But getting into the College of Physicians in Milan, that was a fight. They rejected him for years.
It's crazy. He actually got in partly because he was such a good math teacher. His medical skill was real, though. He even went all the way to Scotland to treat the Archbishop of Edinburgh. The guy had terrible asthma.
Imagine that journey back then. But there's that huge turning point in 1560, the execution of his son. You can't help but think that shaped his later philosophy, the ideas about suffering, justice, all of that.
No doubt. He ended up moving to Bologna, taught medicine there, but his intellectual curiosity got him into trouble. In 1570, the Inquisition arrested him for heresy.
A reminder for us as philosophers that ideas can be dangerous, especially back then. And even though he had to recant and was banned from teaching and publishing, he still ended up serving as a physician to popes in Rome.
It's wild. He died in 1576, but he left behind this incredible autobiography, De Vita Propria. It was published after his death, and it gives you this amazing personal look into his life and his mind.
And the guy was prolific. Beyond the medicine and math, his philosophical writings are massive. There's De Arcanis Eternitatis, all about the concept of order. De Consolatione and De Sapientia are about, wisdom and dealing with hard times. De Animi Immortalitates dives into that huge question of the soul's survival.
And then you have these big works on natural philosophy, De Subtilitate and De Rerum Varietate. Those go deep into the workings of the natural world.
Plus the Honestin, which explores divine knowledge.
And De Utilitate Ex Ab Versus Capienda, a very practical guide to actually getting something good out of your misfortunes. And those are just the highlights. There's tons more covering logic, human nature, everything. For someone who wants to get Renaissance thought, Cardano's your guy.
Okay, so now that we've got the basics of his life and work, let's dive into how he understood the world, his cosmology. The Stanford Encyclopedia entry mentions he was influenced by all these different ideas. You have the late scholastic Aristotelianism, especially the Averroist interpretations.
Yeah, the Averroes. They had this idea of a kind of shared universal intellect.
Right. And he was also drawing on Platonism, astrology, even his own medical insights. All of that's going into his picture of the universe.
And this is where it gets interesting philosophically. He had this vitalistic view of the cosmos. It's not just a bunch of mechanisms ticking away. It's alive, full of energy.
Like a lot of Renaissance thinkers, he made a distinction between, the superlunary and the sublunary world.
Exactly. The superlunary world is the realm beyond the moon, perfect, unchanging. And then there's our world, the sublunary, where everything's changing and imperfect. He believed that this celestial energy coming from God, mediated by all sorts of souls or intelligences, was the driving force behind everything. And he thought celestial heat was this key link between the two realms.
So The stuff of the heavens reaching down into our world. And what about the basic elements? He wasn't totally on board with Aristotle's prime matter, right?
Right, he didn't love that idea. He preferred to start with the elements we can actually observe. Earth, water, air. Those were the primary ingredients of the sublunary world. And that celestial heat, that was the active principle, the force that made things happen. He thought the idea of prime matter, this totally undefined potential, kind of made the specific qualities of the elements pointless. It's interesting, he didn't see fire as a fundamental element, but more like a product of this all-pervasive celestial heat.
So celestial heat is like the bridge between the divine and the material in his philosophy.
Exactly. It's the intermediary. On one side, you have the unchanging realm of intellect, and on the other, the constant flux of the physical world. He even thought about this on a personal level. He looked inward and identified these three principles that he thought governed both our inner lives and the cosmos. An immobile element, the soul, and innate heat. The immobile element is like the grounding, the stability. The soul is moving in how it affects things, but not moving physically itself. And then there's this innate heat, animated by the soul, which in turn drives the physical body. And he was very clear that the soul, unlike celestial heat, which is this active force, is not physical. It doesn't have a location, so it can't move in the way physical things do. And for him, this lack of motion, it's a requirement for perception and thinking.
I see. That's how he connects the inner world with the outer world. And what about the physical and the non-physical in general? How did he see those fitting together?
He believed that matter and form are inseparable. In the natural world, everything material has a form, and all forms are found in matter. Souls, for him, are what animate these material bodies, but the souls themselves, they stay untouched by the physical processes they start. And then there are minds. Minds are like souls that exist on a higher level, completely independent of matter and motion. He saw a hierarchy even among minds, though. You have the highest celestial intelligences, completely separate from the physical world, and then you have things like demonic entities. They're not material, but they can still mess with the physical world through subtle forces.
I remember reading about the soul of the world in his work. That seems like a big deal for understanding his cosmology.
Huge. The anima mundi, that's what he called it. It's like the administrator, managing this constant flow of celestial energy according to God's plan. It works through those planetary intelligences we talked about. It's like the cosmic glue that holds everything together, makes sure the universe runs smoothly. And down here in the sublunary world, nature's not just random chance. It's teleological, directed towards specific goals, guided by intelligence, by that world soul. So for Cardano, nature has a purpose built into it.
And it all fits into this grand, divinely ordered hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right, starting with God at the top and going all the way down to basic matter.
Exactly, this beautifully ordered structure. God, the ultimate source of unity and order at the top. And as you go down, things become more diverse, less unified, until you end up with just pure potential matter. In De Arcanis Eternitatis, he actually lists 14 different levels of being. It shows you how detailed his vision was. You have everything from the basic elements and that celestial heat to plants, animals, humans, even those demonic entities, all the way up to God.
It's amazing how he puts humans right in the middle of this. We're like a mini version of the entire cosmos, a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm.
Right, and he even thought we contain the, I guess you could say, the blueprints, the forms of all other animals just in a dormant state. He was also really interested in whether reason is something unique to humans or maybe the result of a gradual development in nature. Above humans, there's this whole other hierarchy of non-physical minds. He got some of that from Pseudo-Areopagus. There are 7 different levels, from God down to the principle of life itself as it exists in matter.
Wow, it's a really intricate system. So naturally, we have to talk about the soul. It's clearly super important in his thinking, and it ties into this ordered view of nature.
Definitely. And this is where all those different influences on his thought, they really come together. Sometimes it even creates tension in his ideas. He actually planned to write a whole treatise on this called De Natura Liber Unicis. It was going to cover naturalism, universal animation, teleology, all the big stuff.
Too bad he didn't finish it.
Yeah, but even unfinished, it gives us clues about how he was wrestling with these concepts.
His understanding of order, I feel like that has a lot of Plato in it.
Absolutely. Cardano believed that unity equals perfection. For him, everything in the universe is striving for unity, and that unity is what gives structure and purpose to the world. Order, fate. They're all expressions of this unity. Disorder, chance, they're deviations from it. He even thought that things that seem chaotic can ultimately be traced back to ordered sequences. We just need to understand them better. Even beauty in nature, he connected that to the one and the many, that idea that unity is what underlies all the variety we see.
And this principle of order shows up in his thinking about knowledge too, right? Like,
Yeah.
to truly understand something, you
Yeah.
have to trace it back to a single fundamental cause.
Exactly. So where do souls fit in all of this? They're crucial because they're big sources of unity and order themselves. They're immaterial. They're not bound by physical limits. Physical bodies, they're multiple, they change. But souls, they're singular and their presence is everywhere.
I can see how emphasizing the soul so much could be a problem, though. Like, people could accuse him of animism, thinking everything has a soul, or anthropomorphism, giving human qualities to non-human things.
For sure. Especially since he used humans as the model for reason and purpose in his philosophy.
So what about our souls, human souls? What did he think happened to them?
For Cardano, each human soul is unique. It has self-awareness. And that self-awareness, that was his main argument for why souls are immortal. But he also had other arguments, more pragmatic, some based on theology. He said that God gave humans this hope for immortality, this deep desire, that it can't just be a pointless illusion. But then he also said God only gives us a feeble certainty about it, maybe to keep us humble, maybe to show a link between humans and animals. He even thought that going back and forth between believing and doubting, that might be part of God's plan. Ultimately, though, believing in the soul's survival is fundamental to his moral philosophy. It's the basis for finding peace and living an ethical life.
That leads us to his moral philosophy and this idea of the two levels of wisdom. It's like he was looking at ethics from two perspectives. One is very down to earth, and the other is more transcendent, about the afterlife.
Yeah, exactly. He had this big picture, this ontology, where God, the ordered natural world, and the human soul were the foundations. And within this, the universe is all these different levels of order, all ultimately pointing back to the one source, God. He knew there were all these different chains of cause and effect, from nature, from what humans do, even from chance. The celestial bodies have a big influence, and then there are demonic and human minds causing things more locally. But in the end, it's God who's the ultimate source of order and unity, and his description of God is very Trinitarian. Power, intellect, love, an infinite being, totally unified, and his essence is in everything.
But he also thought there was this huge gap between us humans and God, right?
A fundamental difference. He stressed that. Finite beings, we can never truly become infinite. He made this comparison to how we can't look directly at the sun. We can only see its reflection. It's like that with trying to understand God. Our understanding is limited. But this awareness of the divine order, it's what shapes his ethics. He thought a lot about morality. In fact, he wrote about all sorts of ethical issues. But his most important contribution, I think, is how he tried to connect the idea of universal moral principles with the practical, messy reality of actually applying those principles to life. You see this tension played out in his books Theonostan and De Utilitate ex adversus capienda.
So those two books, those represent the two levels of wisdom. Like, there are two different ways of thinking about how to live a good life.
Right. De Utilitate ex adversus capienda is very grounded. It's about dealing with everyday problems, finding happiness in the here and now, focusing on our experiences in this world. Theonostan takes a different approach. It assumes that souls are immortal and that God intervenes in the world. So it lays out a path to happiness that considers the supernatural. They're different, but they both have the same goal: human flourishing. He even talks about tranquility on these two levels. One is about finding peace through doing good and living virtuously in this life. And then there's this deeper kind of peace where you can be happy even when bad things happen.
So is true happiness, for Cardano, dependent on believing in immortality and divine providence?
Yeah, I think so. Even though he talks a lot about practical wisdom, he ultimately believed that true, lasting happiness relies on those two things: the soul living on after death and God actively involved in our lives. He said if there's no afterlife and no ultimate justice from God, then why bother being good for its own sake? Most people wouldn't. He even criticized Seneca's Stoic views on death. He thought it was pointless, even absurd, to think about death without believing that the soul lives on.
I see. The soul is key to his whole system. It's not just part of his cosmology. It's at the heart of his ethics.
Exactly. The soul is our most valuable possession. It's what makes us who we are. And the fact that we're self-aware, that was, for him, the biggest proof that souls are immortal. He even famously said, man is mind. He's putting the intellect at the center of what it means to be human. And this focus on the mind, it also shapes his ethics. He thought that if you want to understand why you do the things you do, and if you want to achieve the highest good, you have to know yourself intellectually. For him, that highest good wasn't something external, it was in the qualities and activities of the mind. And he saw a direct connection between peace of mind and self-awareness. True peace comes from knowing what that highest good is and going after it.
And his idea of tranquility, it's more than just feeling calm, right? It's not passive.
It's much deeper than that. He defined tranquillitas, that's tranquility, as securitas, which is security. It's this unshakable peace, no anxiety. It's a level of wisdom that's even worthy of God, according to him. He saw true tranquility as becoming more like God, reaching a state where nothing feels pointless or without meaning. And happiness, he described it as a perception of pleasure, but a specific kind of pleasure. It's great, it's complete, it's pure, undisturbed, secure. And he warned against chasing intellectual pleasure if it's mixed up with physical sensations or material things. Real ethical peace comes from clarity of thought and intention, not from suppressing your feelings or dulling your senses.
So it's a very active kind of peace.
Yeah, very active. He even described the soul in its most tranquil state as being tremulous and breathing. It's still full of life, constantly moving, but this movement is about pursuing knowledge and understanding, not just physical action. So true tranquility comes from this deep sense of self-fulfillment, securitas. It's about knowing what you're capable of intellectually and morally, and then actually living up to that potential. And he distinguished his view of tranquility from other philosophers, like Seneca, who thought you had to be actively engaged in the world, or Socrates, who talked about engaged tranquility, which can be driven by ambition. And then there are people like Plutarch, Marcus Aurelius. He saw their views as more like escaping from the world ethically.
It seems like when it came to defining the good, he wasn't afraid to borrow from different philosophical schools.
Not at all. He was very eclectic. You see elements of Stoic virtue, the Epicurean idea of being okay with whatever happens, Aristotle's emphasis on living virtuously, and Averroes' belief that the highest happiness is in intellectual knowledge. And his justification for this mix and match approach. He said that wise philosophers, even if they're working independently, often end up with similar ideas that can be brought together harmoniously. From Socrates, he took the idea that wisdom equals knowledge, and that virtue is needed for real happiness. He also liked what the medical writer said about pleasure often being the result of tension or pain being released.
Makes sense. And he stuck with the classic division of goods into those of the mind, the body, and fortune.
Yeah, the mind has virtues, the body has health and long life, and fortune is things like a good wife, fame, a peaceful death.
But what was his deeper definition of good, like on a philosophical level?
In general, he said that good is whatever most people want, but on a deeper level, it's what lasts, what's safe, what doesn't change. And ultimately, that aligns with God, or whatever brings us closer to God. He saw self-preservation as the ultimate good for God, but for humans, we have reason. So we're supposed to live rationally. And he was practical too. He knew you need certain things to survive. You can't be happy if you don't have the basics. He thought virtues, things like duty, compassion, kindness, those were the best goods of the mind. They're eternal. They come from God, and they make us mentally stronger. Fortitude, prudence, moderation, those were like preventative virtues, helping you avoid problems. They come from our nature, our habits, and our reason. So it's about balancing our impulses, learning, making good decisions. All of this moral philosophy, it rests on the idea that souls are immortal, that non-physical existence is real, that the mind is key.
It all comes back to the mind.
Yeah, and that intellectual self-knowledge, that's the highest good. This connects to the debate that started with Averroes about the individual intellect versus the universal intellect. Cardano seemed to think the intellect goes beyond the individual, and for him, real happiness, it was basically eternal life. He even said something similar to St. Paul, that without an afterlife, humans would be worse off than animals because we know we're going to die. And when it comes to the highest good, the summum bonum, he had a couple of ideas. One is becoming more like God through honest and secure love. But he also had this broader idea, a pyramid where wisdom, especially human wisdom, is at the top. Then there's virtue, specifically fortitude and prudence, which even some animals have. And at the bottom, there's progeny, which is good, pursued by most living things.
Okay, so all of that fits with his more spiritual, transcendent outlook. But then there's that book, De Utilitate Ex Adversus Capienda. That seems much more practical, almost like he was thinking about what if there's no afterlife?
Right, it's a shift in focus. Theon Austin is very focused on the spiritual. But in De Utilitate, Cardano's getting down to earth. It's about dealing with the crap life throws at you, finding a way to live peacefully, but based on what's real, what we can experience. It's almost like he's saying, okay, let's assume the soul doesn't survive. How do we live well then? The focus shifts from spiritual goods to how we can use our minds to turn bad experiences into something good, how to grow, how to find some kind of benefit. And he divided all of the bad things that happen into two categories, external and internal. And he judged them based on how much they affect us, how much they limit us.
And he came up with different ways of dealing with these problems, right?
Yeah. 5 different ways. 2 of them, he called them paradoxical. There's the Christian idea that even bad things are ultimately good because of God's plan. And then there's the Stoic idea that external problems can't touch your inner happiness or virtue. But he didn't think those were very practical for everyday life. The other 3 responses he called pragmatic. One is avoiding problems or making them less bad if you can't avoid them. Another is learning how to cope or even escape when bad things do happen. And then his favorite, which is finding something good, some benefit that you can take away from any bad experience.
So it's about taking action, not just enduring.
Right, and he liked this pragmatic approach because he thought it was the best way to navigate the world, to become more resilient. You turn your problems into chances to learn and grow. He even criticized the Stoics, who were all about just bearing things with fortitude, and the Christians, who thought suffering was part of God's plan. He thought actively trying to find something good, some benefit, was more effective, more empowering. And he said, consolation, you only really need that when you've lost something you can't get back. He even had different levels of moral philosophy. There's the rhetorical approach, where you talk about the good that can come from adversity. Then there's the cognitive approach, where you focus on enduring. And then there's his pragmatic approach, all about learning from your struggles.
So even in this more down-to-earth view, knowledge is still important for dealing with problems.
Absolutely. He emphasized a particular kind of knowledge, the scientia. It's about being able to recognize the good things you need for a good life, how to get them, how to use them well, and how to protect them. It's about having the skills to avoid bad stuff and to be ready when bad stuff happens that you can't avoid. He also talked about the human mind, the animus, and how it plays this tricky role in our happiness and our misery. He said that how we're aware of things, how we think about them, that's what makes the difference. It's our ability to think that lets us take a bad experience and make it into something positive. And he also said that external goods, the material stuff, they only make us happy if they're connected to the mind, if we use our minds to engage with them.
So what did he suggest we actually do to get these benefits from adversity?
He said we need to cultivate inner strength, become more prudent, learn about the world, and use our support systems. That means using our resources, going to our friends for advice, learning from our experiences. He also liked Seneca's idea of meditatio mortis, thinking about your own death. He thought that was a good way to get perspective on your problems, to stop being so sad, to be more focused and purposeful, and to become more adaptable, to get used to the fact that things are always changing. He called that the vicissitudo rerum. And his method was all based on this idea that change is constant. That's the way nature is. So he thought even bad experiences can be turned into something good. And he even said that all things are basically equal when it comes to happiness. It's like there's this leveling of the playing field by some higher power. He thought loss and feeling like you're lacking something, those are the root causes of suffering. And if you can develop what he called sensus omissionis, this ability to anticipate loss, it can make you much more prepared for when bad things happen. He even said that experiencing adversity, he called it sensus comitatum, can actually make your happiness better because it gives you contrast and perspective. But he was realistic. He knew there are limits. Like if you're really poor, if you don't have your basic needs met, you can't focus on intellectual and spiritual growth. It's not just about not being rich. It's about not having what you need to actually pursue happiness. And he thought real mental pain, molestian enemy, dolor enemy, that's a serious test of your ability to turn bad things into good.
So it sounds like with this book, he really wanted to help people see the world more realistically, to become more resilient.
Right. He thought a big part of moral philosophy was about getting rid of false beliefs. He even said that Averro's idea of purely mental happiness, it might be a false hope if it's not based on how things really are in the world. He said the job of a philosopher is to help people see past their misconceptions and prejudices. He noticed that a lot of people would rather hold on to a fake happiness than face reality. And real securitas, that inner security, it can't be based on self-deception. His method was all about building up endurance, accepting the human condition. He saw a connection between how appearances can be deceiving in the world and how we often have these unrealistic desires that just cause misery. He said we need to fight against these illusions of happiness. He had these cool metaphors for them. Somnium umbrae and umbra somni. Dreams of shadows and shadows of dreams. And the way to fight them is to become more aware of humana fragilitas, human fragility, and to practice self-mastery. That means self-knowledge, nocete ipsum, and self-control, imperate ipsum. That way, our desires are more realistic.
So it's about being honest with ourselves, about what we can actually control and what we can't.
Exactly. And he thought these practices can help us build good habits, mores. Humans can train themselves. We can shape our nature and our habits through thought, language, action. And it should all be aimed at being useful, finding pleasure, following our natural inclinations, and building on good habits. He also said we need to be careful about what's truly helpful versus what's actually harmful. And language, he thought that was a powerful tool for adjusting our thoughts and actions to different situations. He said we need to balance our desires with reality, try to get what you really need, but also be good at using what you already have. He even had a Latin phrase for that, haberi quod velis, and his quae habes uti commodiscere.
And finally, we have to talk about the whole divination, astrology, fate thing, and his run-in with the Inquisition. That's a pretty dramatic chapter in his life, and it says a lot about the intellectual climate back then.
It really does. His arrest and trial, they were a big turning point, not just for him, but for intellectual freedom during the Counter-Reformation. He was a big target for the church, even before Bruno and Galileo. It was a time when the church was trying to control what people could think and say. And the censor reports from his trial, they show us some of the things the church had problems with in his ideas about divination and astrology.
They accused him of giving too much power to the stars, of downplaying God's role in the world. Some even said he thought Christian martyrs were just crazy because of their horoscopes.
Yeah, it was rough. They basically said he was trying to explain things naturally that the church said were supernatural. Things like God's direct intervention, providence, free will, miracles. They called him an astrologizing philosopher, lumping him in with people like Pomponazzi, who were seen as naturalists. They said he was a skeptic, that he believed everything was predetermined. But as philosophers, we got to be careful with those reports. They weren't exactly objective.
So you're saying his actual views were more nuanced?
For sure. When you look at what he wrote about divination, it mostly lines up with what other Christian astrologers were saying at the time. They didn't think the stars were in charge. They thought the stars were more like tools God used to work in the world. And they still believed in free will, that people could resist the stars to some extent.
So a kind of middle ground.
Yeah, moderate libertarianism, that's what it's called. And he made a distinction between providence and fate. Providence is God's perfect, timeless order. Fate is how that order plays out in the universe over time. He had this treatise called De Fato, but it's lost now. It seems like he argued that fate affects everything, and it's tied to God's nature and how cause and effect work. But he also talked about the usefulness of free will.
I see. So he wasn't saying everything is completely predetermined.
Right. And his other writings on divination show that he thought it worked because of this underlying order of fate. If you understand the patterns of the stars, you can get glimpses of what might happen in the future.
And he used medicine to explain astrology.
All the time. He thought they were similar. Just like a doctor looks at the body to see how it's working and then tries to fix what's wrong, an astrologer looks at the stars to figure out what might happen and whether anything can be done about it. He even compared it to a shipwreck. Even if a shipwreck is inevitable, if the sailors are skilled and prepared, it can make a big difference in how things turn out. He also thought different people were affected by the stars in different ways. Rulers and powerful people were more subject to them, so God could use the stars to guide history. But regular people also have to deal with fate. He even talked about the astrological signs before his son was executed. He saw those as proof of God's providence, that there was a bigger plan, even though it was a tragedy. So for him, human life was this balance between what the stars incline us towards and what we can do with our knowledge and willpower. We can fight those influences or we can work with them. It wasn't like he was saying God wasn't involved. It's more like God and the supernatural world were communicating with the natural world through these intermediaries and through nature itself.
And dreams were another way God could communicate with us.
He thought so. He wrote a whole book about it, De Somnis. He said, dreams are how God sends us knowledge during sleep, through those celestial intelligences. It's like our souls are connecting with the divine mind. He believed we actually see the future in our dreams, but it's usually jumbled up because our bodies are messing things up, or we're anxious, or our senses are overloaded. And he had this very Neoplatonic idea that the soul can access higher knowledge beyond what our senses can perceive, but our physical bodies get in the way. He thought dreams are made from our memories, mixed up by celestial influences, like a mosaic made from different colored stones. So they're usually hard to understand. He said there are these special dreams, idola, that are super clear, but those are rare. Most of the time, dream interpretation is tricky. He said this is because of the infinite nature of things. The soul and the realm of what can be known, they're both limitless. He didn't like simple, literal interpretations. He thought great philosophers understand that reality is complex, infinite.
So no easy answers when it comes to dreams.
Nope. And he thought that knowledge and ignorance, they're all mixed up, even on a cosmic level. Even powerful beings, they don't fully grasp the knowledge that's flowing through them, guiding them. He used the example of Galen, the doctor. Galen could move his finger, but he didn't fully understand the muscles and nerves involved. He said that ultimately it's because of the divine framework. And even those celestial intelligences, they know they influence things, but they don't know where their knowledge comes from or exactly how they make things happen. He thought nature itself knows the past and the future, but even the highest beings are still ignorant compared to God.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Girolamo Cardano, it's clear he was an incredible figure, a true Renaissance man who combined science, philosophy, even mysticism.
What's really impressive to me is how he tried to build this whole system of understanding, a complete picture of reality. He brought together his observations of the physical world with deep questions about the soul and how we should live. And he did it all while facing challenges, personal tragedies, even persecution. It's